So when it comes to Johnny Depp versus AH, some of the best witnesses we have heard from have been security teams, aka bodyguards. Some of this testimony has not only been eye-opening, but has been rather hilarious. Like take Starling Jenkins' testimony, for example, where it talks about finding Johnny Depp's phone with a Find My iPhone app, approaching a homeless man to buy it back, and bribing him with $425 cash, 3 chicken tacos, 2 bags of chips, 2 apples, and 4 bottles of water. That's because, for better or worse, depending on who you're asking, Johnny Depp and AH, they're no longer presenting any type of facade. They're being exactly who they are. We have multiple examples of this too, ranging from Malcolm Connolly, who told us exactly what happened in Australia, to Starling Jenkins, whom we just discussed, to Sean Bett, and on. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're looking at the people who really, really know these folks, seeing exactly what they have to say. And you know what? They don't have anything good to say about AH. So hey there, so today, you and I, we return to that wonderful world of Johnny Depp coverage to continue, number 1, archiving, number 2, preparation for Johnny Depp versus AH 2021, and number 3, a discussion about someone that was canceled in 2016 and should be exonerated in 2020-2021. Now, the interesting thing about Johnny Depp is that you have people from all walks of life, be that employees, be that friends, be that strangers and more, saying, hey, this is what happened and we bagged Johnny Depp. Compare that to AH, who has her friends talking for her, and well, you get the picture. Here, for example, is the witness statement of Malcolm Connolly. Now, Malcolm Connolly, he's been in security for 23 years. He worked for Johnny Depp and his family for 16. And when he's going through his story, he tells you things that there supposedly weren't witnesses to. Take, for example, his account of Australia, March 2015, where I can say, he says, that AH's account of when we had to take him to the hospital and treat his finger injury on the 8th of March 2015 bears no resemblance to my recollection. At the time, I was staying in an apartment block called Peppers in Broad Beach. Most of the crew and security were all stationed there. I remember at some point in the middle of the afternoon on that same date getting an urgent call from Jerry Judge, who is no longer with us, but who used to be in charge of Johnny's security. Jerry had been doing something else that day, so he wasn't around. He told me to get out to the property urgently with Andrew, the driver. His words were along the lines of, Malcolm, get in the car, extract the boss from the situation. The property was just off the highway with a long drive. Outside patrolling the grounds for security reasons, there were always an RST, or resident security team, with 2 4-wheel vehicles and 4 guys. I got to the door around 1:30 to 2 p.m., knocked, but there was no answer. I could hear the ruckus inside. I opened the door, which wasn't locked, saw Johnny in the foyer area of the house. He and AH were screaming at each other. She was wearing a sort of green silk night thing. You could call it a slip. I shouted at Johnny words to the effect of, come with me, you are coming with me. I then took his arm, trying to move him out, but he broke away. I said again words to the effect of, Johnny, come with me. It wasn't easy, but I did get him outside. I had the car door open, and when we were outside, Johnny said to me words to the effect of, look at my finger. She cut my bleeping finger off. She smashed my hand with a vodka bottle. I saw his finger. It was a mess. He also told us that she put a cigarette out on his cheek. I could see the mark on his face. Absolutely insane, by the way. Never picked up by the media either. AH appeared at the door and then came close to the car, screaming, crying, calling out along the lines of, are you just going to leave it like this, you bleeping coward? Then she was saying, I love you, I love you. Is this how you're going to end this? She was not making a lot of sense. 1 second, she was begging Johnny not to leave the house, and then she was screaming at him for running away. She was absolutely hysterical. I was worried that she might start throwing objects at Johnny or at myself, as I'd seen her throw objects before. For example, I'd seen her lob a fork in Johnny's general direction at once. A fork, by the way. Another Another time, I recall she threw a lighter at him, another time a can of Coke. I knew we needed to get out of there as soon as possible. I could see A.H.'s face very clearly. She did not have any marks on her face or arms. She didn't look to be in any physical distress. I was much more concerned about Johnny. He was obviously in emotional distress and panicking. He wasn't that drunk or out of it, though, and was easily standing on his own and having a conversation. I would estimate that I was there for around 25 minutes in total. We then took Johnny to my apartment around 2 p.m. on the basis it was private. Fortunately, one of my guys, Trevor, was there when we were getting into the lift, and I told him to stop anyone else using the lift so I could get Johnny in without anyone seeing him. As soon as we got into my apartment, I started clearing Johnny's finger in my bathroom. When I saw it properly, I knew it was too much for me, even though I'm first aid trained. Debbie, Dr. Kipper's nurse, had been allocated an apartment in the same block as me. I called her, got her to my apartment. It took her about 3 minutes from when I called her, and she started triage on Johnny's finger. She then called Dr. Kipper and asked him to come over and have a second look. When Dr. Kipper arrived, probably about 30 minutes after Johnny and I got there, he said it was way beyond his capability and told us we needed to take Johnny to the hospital. Jerry and I then took Johnny to the hospital with Dr. Kipper, Nurse Debbie. It would have been around 4:30 to 5 o'clock. We knew that we could not let the true cause of Johnny's injury become known, as this would create extremely bad publicity. As a result, Jerry suggested that we say that Johnny had injured his finger while slicing onions. I thought it was fairly obvious that this was not true, given the severity of the injury, and suggested we say he jammed it in a car door. However, we went with the onion cover story. The specialist didn't believe us for 1 second. Johnny didn't go back to the house over the next few days. Instead, he stayed in my apartment with me. Now, as far as A.H. is concerned, the themes you saw arise in that statement, it's going to continue here with Sean Bett. Sean Bett also has qualification, by the way, worked with the L.A. County Sheriff's Department from 1999 to 2004, was in private security for 16 years, working with Johnny Depp for the past 9. So here, he talks about, not knowing exactly what this is about, but he knows what type of claims that are out there. He said, I was with Mr. Depp and A.H. very regularly throughout the period, never saw any of the stuff that A.H. was referencing. I also never saw Mr. Depp commit any acts at all against her person or any other person. Indeed, when they were in Los Angeles, I would have been with Mr. Depp and A.H. between 5 and 7 days a week. So A.H. sustained any injuries during that time, I would have seen them. I saw no such injuries. On the contrary, through the course of Mr. Depp and A.H.'s relationship, A.H. was verbally and physically that way toward Mr. Depp. On many occasions, I witnessed her shout at Mr. Depp. I was also told by Mr. Depp on multiple occasions that A.H. had physically accosted him. I'm going to use the word accosted here. A very common occurrence throughout the relationship would be that Mr. Depp would have me and other members of his security team take him away from A.H. due to her behavior. He would then stay somewhere else. You notice the staying somewhere else theme too. This happened on so many occasions that it's not possible for me to remember them all in detail. However, I would describe it as a reoccurring cycle that A.H. would accost Mr. Depp, who would then remove himself from the situation. And we've heard that on tape. A.H. often behaved in this way when she had been drinking. I learned quickly to recognize the signs so that we were able to leave the situation before it escalated further. I also know that she could be volatile toward Mr. Depp, and so it was important that he did not remain in a situation where A.H., when she was in this kind of mood. So he brings up April 21st, 2016, one of two major claims that A.H. threw out there. On April 21st, 2016, I remember driving Mr. Depp to a party for A.H.'s birthday. He had been at a business meeting, was running late for the party. Later on in the evening, I was called by Mr. Depp, and I then drove him home to another one of his properties. He had told me that A.H. had sought to argue with him and had punched him, causing him to sustain visible injury. I took a picture of his injury, and they added it to this. The following day, I received from Mr. Kevin Murphy, Mr. Depp's then estate manager, photos of human feces in Mr. Depp and AH's bed. I believe this was the result of the actions of AH. Then they go to the 21st. So that was his statement, by the way, of Poopgate. So I've been told by the claimant's solicitor, among many things, the defendant specifically alleged that Mr. Depp accosted AH on the 21st of May 2016. I set out my recollection of that day below. So I was working on the evening of the 21st of May 2016. Mr. Depp, my former partner, Mr. Jerry Judge, and I arrived at the house. They give a time between 1930 and 1945. Mr. Depp owned the adjoining penthouses 3, 4, and 5. So that night, Mr. Depp was sober, lucid, and he expressed his concern to us about how AH might behave. We entered penthouse 3, where Mr. Depp and AH primarily resided. There were lit candles, and there was an open bottle of wine and at least one glass on the counter. Mr. Depp told us he would go upstairs to the bedroom to speak to AH. I do not think that anyone else in the apartment at this stage. When he did so, Mr. Judge and I, we went into the hallway. We went very briefly into penthouse 4 and then returned to outside the door, penthouse 3. One can see into the penthouse and hear what is happening inside from there. After approximately 10 minutes, Mr. Judge and I heard AH's shouts. I could not make out what she was saying, but we immediately entered the penthouse. I have been told by Mr. Depp's solicitors that the defendant alleged that AH tried to telephone one of Mr. Depp's quote-unquote trusted employees. She did not call me or Mr. Judge, and the only reason why we entered the penthouse 3 was because we heard these screams. When we entered, we saw Mr. Depp standing approximately 20 feet away from AH, who was sitting by the couch. As soon as AH noticed that we had entered the room, she looked very surprised. Her demeanor then changed. She pointed at Mr. Depp and screamed to us words to the effect of, "If he hits me one more time, I'm calling the police." I believe that Raquel Pennington was in the penthouse 3 at this stage. I understand from Mr. Depp's advisor that Miss Pennington and AH had both testified that AH summoned Miss Pennington by text around 8:06 that night, and that Miss Pennington rushed down the hallway from penthouse 5 to penthouse 3 to assist. I also understand that Josh Drew claimed that Mr. Judge and I were waiting in penthouse 5 rather than in front of penthouse 3 and saw us through a peephole running toward penthouse 3 when yelled start. Both of those statements are falsehoods for the same reason. Other than our brief entry into penthouse 4, Mr. Judge and I were guarding the penthouse 3 door for the entirety of the incident to protect Mr. Depp in case AH pulled something. So Miss Pennington did not come through us into the only entrance into penthouse 3. She was clearly already inside penthouse 3 when we arrived. And her ex-husband testimony that he saw us running through the peephole is just a lie to explain the impossible. Interesting, huh? I have quite good eyesight. I was able to see that AH was wearing little to no makeup. Her skin was quite pale. She had no marks, basically. Any marks here. I could see Mr. Depp was visibly upset and been accused of hitting AH. However, he had not come closer than 20 feet to her during the time I was able to observe them. I did not notice any smashed glass or broken bottles in the apartment at the time. Mr. Depp, Mr. Judge, and I agreed it would be best if Mr. Depp left the building due to the fact that the situation had escalated and AH was hysterically shouting at Mr. Depp and making allegations about his behavior. We did so, but once we were in the car, we realized that Mr. Depp had left his mobile phone, penthouse 3. As a result, Mr. Judge called Mr. Drew, who lived with his fiancée, Miss Pennington, in one of Mr. Depp's penthouses. Mr. Drew brought the phone downstairs within 5 to 10 minutes and handed it to Mr. Judge. I've never seen Mr. Depp do any of the stuff that he's accused of, basically. They bring it all up. Anything that's said there, yeah, he's not the type of person that does that. I would be somebody that would see it. Signed, Sean Bett. Now, you also have Starling Jenkins, who adds to this stuff, too. Starling Jenkins is yet another person that has, well, you look at their resume. They worked in security, transportation since 92. They worked for the claimant personally since 1993, providing security for both him and the family. Transitioned to this line of work after serving in the U.S. Marines from 83 to 87. So after skipping over the legalese, we come to my experience of AH and Johnny's relationship relationship. In many years I've worked for Johnny, I've never seen him use physical force on AH in any way, nor have I seen any marks, basically, of any type. On the occasion that I have witnessed Johnny or AH argue, he assumes a passive tone and wants to leave her presence. You notice that is noted every time. He wants to get the heck out of here. So the events of the 21st, 22nd of April 2016, which we just saw statements about as well. I was working security shift at that on the birthday party day. That's going to be the 21st of April. The night AH was celebrating birthday with friends. When I left the residence, Johnny had not yet arrived. I returned to the residence the following day, on the 22nd, to escort AH and her friends to the desert for the Coachella Music Festival. I understand that AH has alleged Johnny committed acts of DV on that night of the 21st. When I arrived at the residence on the 22nd, I saw no marks or any kind, basically nothing there at all. When I entered the residence, AH explained to me that she had thrown Johnny's cell phone and wallet containing it off the balcony the night before, and that she was using the Find My iPhone application on another cell phone to locate his phone. Now, I love this paragraph here. The Find My iPhone application indicated that Johnny's phone was somewhere on the street below the balcony of the residence. I walked out on the street, did not see the phone, and I then asked several homeless people if they had it. One homeless man admitted to me that he had the phone, and he returned the phone to me in exchange for the following: $425 cash, 3 chicken tacos, 2 bags of chips, 2 apples, and 4 bottles of water. Man, that is so concise. It's interesting, isn't it? I drove an SUV with their luggage and AH's dogs to the desert, and AH drove separately with her sister and friends in a Ford Mustang. These friends were, and it goes through all these people here. I believe that AH's friend, Io Tillett Wright, also was there, but separate. Once in the desert, it was my responsibility to drive the group from their hotel, Palm Springs, the park, to the Coachella event, as well as shadow them for safety and security reasons. During the weekend, I heard AH frequently express her anger that Johnny did not come to the birthday party on the 21st, but she did not say one thing or make any innuendos about allegations of DV. She was hooping it up all weekend, and it was clear that her and her girlfriend spent much of the time at Coachella intoxicated. She threw up at least once in the parking lot of the Parker and was clearly dehydrated at the time. I had to obtain ginger ale and crackers for her. So I thought all of that was interesting, not only because of the testimony, but because of the implication as well. These people, they were around me, but they did nothing to help me. I mean, imagine that kind of statement thrown out there, aimed at your reputation, because it's not just aimed at Johnny Depp. It's aimed at his security team. It's aimed at anybody that worked there. It's aimed at staff of building, bystanders, and on. That's the type of damage, the ripple effect that this person tried to do. And yeah, you tell me who you believe. Do you believe this handful of friends, again, that have AH there? Or do you believe Johnny Depp, bodyguards, people that were hired, people that weren't hired, and on? I mean, when you look at that, who exactly seems more credible? But I'll leave that to you. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. I do appreciate you. You make these endeavors possible. I say that all the time, but I mean that. You make this stuff work. Without you, none of it's here. So thank you.